Marcus Reynolds rolled to a stop outside the granite pillars of the Centennial War Memorial, just as the sun crested the top of the flagpole. The late May air was cool and fragrant with fresh mulch and pine, and ribbons of morning light danced across the polished bronze plaques bearing the names of the fallen. Marcus, in his sharply pressed dress blues, brass buttons gleaming, medals aligned in precise order, felt a surge of both pride and solemn duty. This plaza had been his second home on every Memorial Day since he returned from his third tour in Iraq, the place where he laid wreaths, saluted younger soldiers, and stood in reverent silence as taps echoed off marble. Today, he had brought his father with him, a former Navy petty officer whose own medals Marcus had seen only in a shoebox, so that both generations could honor friends who would never come home. He stepped forward to the heavy wrought iron gates, his polished dress shoes clicking against the granite floor. A lone security guard, clipboard in hand and cap shadowing his eyes, blocked the entrance. "Good morning, sir," the guard said, voice polite but distant. "Access is restricted to authorized personnel only." Marcus produced his veteran's ID and veteran's pass, embossed plastic cards he'd carried every year without fail. He held them out together, the ID's holographic eagle catching the morning light. The guard's jaw tightened. "I'm sorry, sir, but we've had to tighten security. This section is closed until further notice." He handed back the cards without a second look. Marcus felt the blood drain from his face. He swallowed, searching the guard's impassive features for any sign of mistake. Beside him, his father opened his mouth, then closed it, eyes glistening. Around them, white families with toddlers and elderly couples in sun hats drifted past through a side entrance that welcomed them without question. A group of ROTC cadets filed in behind Marcus, rifles at port arms, greeted by uniformed park rangers with nods. He straightened in his blues, heart pounding. "I'm a retired Marine Corps captain," he said, voice low and shaking. "I earned the right to be here." The guard pressed his lips together, tore a page from the clipboard, and scribbled, "No entry," before turning back to the flow of late-arriving visitors. Marcus stepped back from the gates, metal humming under his gloved fingertips, and felt a tight knot of humiliation and anger knot in his chest. The plaza beyond, a sacred expanse of flags and wreaths, was now denied to one of its own. He looked at the names etched into the wall, friends, brothers in arms, wondering how a ceremony meant to unite could have erected a barrier so cold and arbitrary. His father placed a steady hand on his shoulder. Together they turned away, footsteps echoing hollowly in the marble corridor. As the gates closed behind them, Marcus knew that this indignity, this insult to every veteran's service, would not go unanswered. Marcus and his father walked in stunned silence down the curved pathway that skirted the memorial's reflecting pool. The morning breeze stirred the rows of flags overhead, each one snapping crisply against its pole, as if in salute. Yet the gates remained locked behind them. Marcus's hands itched to reach for his ID again, to prove it was a mistake, but the guard's refusal echoed in his head like a judgment. Unauthorized. Back home, the two veterans sat at the kitchen table while Marcus's mother brewed strong coffee. His father finally broke the heavy quiet. "Son, I've never seen you look so—" He searched for the word. Marcus cut him off. "Disrespected." He replayed every detail, the guard's averted eyes, the neat scrawl of "no entry" on the clipboard, the ease with which ordinary visitors streamed past a secondary gate. He fumbled for his phone and tapped out a short message to a veterans Facebook group. "Locked out of the Centennial Memorial today despite valid ID. Has anyone else experienced this?" Within minutes, the post began to draw comments. A retired Army sergeant from across town replied, "Same thing happened to me last year. They said paperwork expired, but never told me what to renew." A Navy nurse shared a grainy photo of herself standing before a closed sign in uniform. By midday, Marcus's screenshot of the locked gates and his dress blues had been reshared dozens of times under the hashtag #LockedOutForMemorial. Local blogger and white community organizer Hannah Lee wrote a short column on her site, calling the incident a betrayal of every soldier's sacrifice. White commenters on the city's online forum were divided. Some wrote in with outrage, "How dare they shut out our veterans?" Others defended the park's new Security protocols. You can't have thousands of people trampling the grounds every year. Rules are rules. That afternoon, the city's print newspaper ran a small item on page B3 under Community Notes. Veteran denied entry to war. Memorial Captain Marcus Reynolds, USMC, retired, was refused access to the Centennial War Memorial this morning, despite presenting valid veteran credentials. Park officials cite new security measures. The terse report felt like a slap, an institutional shrug that buried his story in the back pages. Yet the backlash online only intensified. Local radio talk show host Tom Porter invited Marcus on air that evening. When Marcus recounted his experience, voice steady despite the anger underneath, listeners flooded the station with calls. Some offered apologies, others griped about this PC culture. But all agreed, a veteran in full uniform should never be treated like a trespasser at his own memorial. Late into the night, Marcus lay awake, the bedroom ceiling illuminated by passing car headlights. He could still hear the flags snapping in that morning breeze, see the polished marble he'd been barred from touching. The outrage online and the sympathetic voices on the radio fed a growing conviction in him. This was no isolated mix-up. It was a deeper wrong, a symbol of a promise unkept, that those who served would be honored, not excluded. As dawn approached, he made a silent vow. He would not simply recount this insult. He would rally others, lead them to those locked gates, and force the city to open them wide. That evening, Marcus sat at the scarred wooden table in the back room of the VFW hall, the air thick with cigar smoke and the low murmur of fellow veterans nursing lukewarm coffee. He opened his laptop and scrolled through the flurry of supportive and outraged comments on his Facebook post. Each message carried the same refrain: "We cannot let this stand." He tapped the keyboard, drafting a simple call to action. Join me this Memorial Day at 8 a.m. at the locked gates of the Centennial War Memorial. We stand together for every veteran denied entry. When the draft was ready, he hit send to the Home of the Brave Veterans group, expecting a few dozen responses. Within minutes, however, notifications flooded in. 50 RSVPs, then 100, then 300. A retired Air Force colonel offered to spread the word through his church's bulletin. A group of white clergy promised an interfaith prayer service. A local teacher volunteered school copiers for flyer runs. Marcus leaned back, heart pounding. Momentum was building. By the next morning, Marcus had arranged a planning meeting at City Hall's community room. He arrived carrying a stack of permit forms and a battered manila envelope filled with supporting documents. A roster of veteran members, letters of endorsement from the VFW commander, and a local NAACP chapter president, and a draft of the desired permit for a peaceful Memorial Day vigil. At the long oak table sat 3 white city clerks and a stone-faced assistant parks director. Marcus set his folder on the table, placed his veteran ID on top, and began. "I'm requesting permission for a 1-hour vigil on your plaza," he said, voice measured. "We'll read names of the fallen, lay wreaths at the gates, and ask the park to unlock access for all veterans." The parks director tapped a pen against her notepad. "Memorial Day is your own tradition," she said, "but the plaza is closed until noon. We can't grant exclusive use." Marcus's chest tightened. "It's not exclusive. We're simply asking for access to the very memorial designed for our sacrifice." He pushed forward a spreadsheet outlining expected attendance. 700 veterans, 1,000 family members, plus a safety plan, first aid stations, and volunteer stewards. The clerks exchanged glances. After a tense pause, the city clerk cleared his throat. "We'll need proof of liability coverage," he said, "and you must agree to limit your numbers to 500. Anything more requires a full parade permit." Marcus exhaled. He consulted his notes. The VA charity had already offered coverage, and he'd secured sponsorship from a local insurer, white-owned. He agreed to the 500-person cap, knowing supporters would spill over, and handed over the binder. "Thank you," he said, voice calm but resolute. "We'll prepare the insurance paperwork and return by Friday." Over the next 2 days, Marcus worked alongside a white civil rights organizer, Hannah Lee, to finalize details. They printed 1,000 flyers at the teacher's lounge, each reading in bold red letters, "Veterans locked out? Stand with us at the gates. 8 a.m. Memorial Day." Volunteers, white businessmen, clergy, and retired police, posted them in cafes, libraries, and church bulletin boards across town. Email reminders went out to veterans networks nationwide, urging attendees to bring their IDs and dress uniforms. On the eve of Memorial Day, Marcus walked the route from the VFW hall to the memorial, rehearsing his speech under the streetlights. He felt the weight of every handshake he'd made, every confirmation email sent by a supporter, including dozens of white community leaders pledging their presence. The locked gates loomed in the distance, dark and silent, but now flanked by something greater, the promise of a unified stand. As he turned for home, Marcus knew that tomorrow he would transform personal indignity into a public act of remembrance, and that no locked gate could hold back the thousands who would march with him. Dawn breaks clear and cool on Memorial Day as Marcus Reynolds arrives at 7:30 a.m. with his father by his side. The asphalt parking lot is already half full of cars bearing veteran license plates, and clusters of uniform-clad soldiers, Army, Navy, Air Force, stand in small knots, checking ceremonial rifles and adjusting cap visors. White clergy in collars and lay leaders in crisp dress shirts pace, clutching printed orders of service. The air carries the scent of fresh coffee from a food truck parked nearby, and the hopeful hum of conversation. "I'll read my cousin's name. Don't forget the wreaths. They won't shut us out today." At precisely 8 a.m., exactly as the permit stipulated, the group, 500 strong, threads along the locked gates in a respectful line. Marcus steps to the front, dressed in his dress blues, medals gleaming in the golden light. He raises his folded flag high, voice carrying across the hushed crowd. "We gather this morning not to protest an institution, but to reclaim our promise. Every veteran, regardless of race or rank, deserves access to these hallowed grounds." Behind him, the crowd chants, low and steady, "Unlock the gates! Honor our mates!" A white park ranger named Emily, a veteran herself, hovers at the side gate, visibly torn. As Marcus lays the flag at the base of the main gates, she approaches the maintenance door, keys jingling. The security supervisor storms over, shouting, "You can't open that gate!" But Emily's gaze meets Marcus's calm, resolute eyes. She turns the key, the lock clicks, and the side gate swings inward. A cheer ripples through the assembled veterans. As they file onto the marble plaza, the crunch of gravel under polished boots echoes between the granite walls. Marcus leads them in reading names carved into the bronze panels. Sergeant Luis Herrera, Private Maria Thompson, Corporal David Lee. Each name draws a collective bow of heads and a murmur of "present" from the crowd. White families and onlookers line the perimeter, some wiping tears, others saluting in silent solidarity. An elderly white World War II veteran steps forward to place a wreath beside Marcus's flag. "Welcome home, son," he says softly, voice cracking with emotion. Marcus extends his hand. They clasp forearms in a veteran's grip. For the next hour, veterans and supporters move freely among the monuments, laying flowers, exchanging memoirs, lighting candles at the tomb of the unknown soldier. White Park officials circulate, offering apologies and taking notes, while reporters in press vests capture every solemn moment. When the final bugle of taps sounds at 9 a.m., a hush falls. Even the wind seems to pause in respect. As the crowd disperses, elderly couples lingering for photographs, young cadets crisp with pride, Marcus stands at the center of the plaza, watching the gates swing open for all. The barrier that once excluded him now stands as a testament to collective action. In that golden hour, the memorial fulfills its promise, a place of honor open to every veteran who has borne its name. By late morning, live news crews had swarmed the steps of City Hall, their satellite trucks and camera lights casting stark glare across the fountains where Marcus and the other veterans had marched just hours before. National outlets, CNN and ABC News, ran split-screen coverage of the vigil footage on repeat. The moment the side gate swung open, The sea of uniforms pressing forward, Emily the park ranger's trembling hand turning the key. Back home, social media feeds erupted in solidarity, with hashtag Memorial for All trending alongside pictures of veterans of every race standing shoulder to shoulder at the now open gates. Yet not all the reaction was celebratory. By noon, the op-ed pages of the white-owned City Herald ran a blistering editorial titled Sacrilege at the Memorial, arguing that Marcus's vigil had politicized a sacred space and set a dangerous precedent for future demonstrations. Letters poured into their online comment section. Some readers lauded Marcus's courage, while others, many invoking respect for tradition, demanded that security protocols be respected. A handful even questioned his motives, calling him an attention seeker who desecrated the solemnity of Memorial Day. These voices, though loud in print, only fanned a wider groundswell of support. That afternoon, dozens of white clergy, veterans' spouses, and local business owners rallied outside the Herald's headquarters, with homemade signs reading, "Honor all who served," and "No veteran left behind." Their chants, "Open the gates! Honor their fates!" echoed off the brick walls as they delivered a welcoming petition of 8,000 signatures to the editorial board, demanding a formal apology. Local radio hosts invited Marcus back on air. This time, the questions were sharper. How did you mobilize so many? What does this mean for our city's image? Marcus answered with measured calm, crediting the thousands of veterans who refused to be silenced, and the white allies, teachers, clergy, even the park ranger, who put principle above procedure. Meanwhile, the city council, which had originally skirted the issue, found itself under intense pressure. By day's end, the council president, a white alderman who had stayed silent until now, called an emergency session for the very next morning. The agenda: review and amend the park's access regulations in light of recent events. City Hall's grand chambers, usually sparsely attended on holiday weekends, filled to capacity with veterans in uniform, families clutching folded flags, and a sea of white community leaders wearing support ribbons. Reporters lined the balconies. Police mounted a respectful perimeter, ensuring order. As night fell, a palpable momentum carried through the city streets. Flyers for tomorrow's council meeting circulated in cafes and on church lawn signs, urging all citizens, veteran or not, to attend. White suburban neighbors texted one another, "We're going. Bring extra chairs. Don't forget your pins." In Marcus's inbox, dozens of emails from civic groups offered legal support, event logistics, and promises to testify on his behalf. Even the reluctant security supervisor from the memorial had privately reached out with an apology and a handwritten note. "Thank you for showing me what true service looks like." Under that single line, he had signed his name. By the time Marcus finally rested that night, the stakes had grown far beyond a locked gate. What had begun as personal indignity had mushroomed into a movement demanding institutional change. The shock of exclusion had given way to the roar of collective will, and no city council, no matter how hesitant, could now ignore the veterans who stood united, ready to claim not just access, but the respect and recognition they had rightfully earned. By 9 a.m. the next morning, City Hall's council chamber was filled beyond capacity. The marble floor gleamed beneath the chandeliers, and the oak-paneled walls echoed with the rustle of uniforms and the murmur of petition signers. Marcus Reynolds sat near the front row, flanked by his father in dress whites and Emily the park ranger in her ranger greens, while waves of veterans, Army, Navy, Air Force, and Marines lined the balconies. Beneath them, white clergy in collars and community leaders in crisp suits clustered around folding chairs. Reporters from every major network jostled for position at the back, cameras trained on the dais. Council President Ann Whitaker, a white alderwoman in a navy blazer, called the meeting to order. Her gavel tapped 3 times against the polished desk. "We are here to consider amendments to the Centennial War Memorial Access Ordinance," she announced, voice steady but strained. "Testimony will begin with Captain Marcus Reynolds." Marcus stood adjusting the row of medals on his chest. His voice carried through the hushed chamber. "You invited me to serve my country," he began, eyes sweeping the seated council members, tall white men in business attire, and a handful of white women in patterned dresses. "You sent me into harm's way. You gave me a veteran's ID promising respect and honor. Yet yesterday you locked those gates in my face. That is not a security measure. It is a betrayal of every veteran's sacrifice." A murmur rippled across the room. Whitaker tapped her gavel. "Please continue, Captain," she said. Marcus clicked to his notes. "A memorial is not an amusement park. It is hallowed ground. Denying access to those who served dishonors both the living and the dead. I stand here not just for myself, but for the thousands who answered the call of duty, black and white, young and old, deserving equal right to remember their fallen." He paused. "I ask you to amend the ordinance today. Any honorably discharged veteran, upon presentation of valid credentials, shall have guaranteed unrestricted access to the memorial grounds, without special permit or limitation." Councilman Robert Grayson, a white retiree in a starched shirt, rose to object. "Captain Reynolds, with respect, our security assessments require controlled entry. Last year's overcrowding led to vandalism of the eternal flame. We can't compromise safety." His voice dripped caution. A hush fell. Then, from the second row, a white retired Colonel Teresa Blake stood. Her silver hair and crisp uniform commanded attention. "Safety, Councilman?" she challenged. "These gates were built after World War I to honor sacrifice, not to punish the very buyers of those candles. If we fear a few thousand veterans, we have already surrendered to dishonor." She sat as hushed applause rolled through the veterans. Another councilman, Marcus's former adversary on the Parks Board, muttered about budgetary concerns, but a chorus of shouts from clergy and business owners drowned him out. "Honor, not lockdown. Open the gates." Women clutching folded flags and elderly couples in sun hats rose in unison. White ministers spoke of moral duty. Business leaders warned of reputational damage. The chamber's tension peaked as Whitaker banged her gavel. "We will vote now." Hands shot up across the dais. One by one, council members, 8 white men and 2 white women, voted in favor. The lone holdout abstained, then changed to yes, after seeing the unity below. With a final knock, Whitaker declared the motion carried unanimously. An explosion of cheers filled the room. Veterans embraced. Emily hugged Marcus, tears in her eyes. Council members shook his hand, some offering apologies. Whitaker pressed a signed copy of the new ordinance into his palm. All honorably discharged veterans shall have free, unfettered access to the Centennial War Memorial, without fee or permit. Outside, reporters shouted questions as Marcus and his allies emerged into the sunlight. The gates to the memorial stood open, flags snapping overhead. Marcus lifted his father's hand in triumph, knowing that a law had changed, but more importantly, a promise had finally been kept. 1 year later, on the first Memorial Day under the new ordinance, the gates to the Centennial War Memorial swung open at dawn without a single lock in sight. Marcus Reynolds arrived just before 6 a.m., crisp in his dress blues, the sunrise painting the bronze plaques in warm gold. Beside him stood his father in navy white, their medals gleaming in tandem. Between them lay a fresh wreath of red poppies and white lilies, symbols of sacrifice and renewal. Behind the former locked gates, the plaza now stretched wide and welcoming. Hundreds of veterans, black and white, young and old, marched forward in regimented rows, rifles at port arms and uniforms pressed. Families, children on their fathers' shoulders, and school bands bearing white-tipped drums followed close behind. White clergy in collars led an opening prayer. Their voices rose in harmony with the bugler's first solitary note of Réveillé, the sound echoing off the marble walls and scattering across the polished floor. At the memorial center, where the "In Honor of Every Veteran" plaque had been installed months earlier, Marcus stepped onto the dais to read the names of the fallen. His voice, steady and clear, carried through the hushed crowd. Private First Class James Douglas, Sergeant Helena Garcia, Corporal Anthony Jenkins. With each name, veterans and civilians alike raised their hands in salute. White families dabbed tears from their eyes. Children stood at silent attention. As he finished, a white high school ROTC squad presented arms, and the American flag fluttered for a full minute before being lowered to half-staff in solemn respect. Following taps, the crowd moved beneath the memorial's soaring arch, where a new inscription glowed in the morning light. No veteran left outside, unfettered access, eternal honor. White Park Rangers and local police, once gatekeepers, now stood as guides, assisting older veterans up the low marble steps. Emily, the ranger who had unlocked the gates the year before, presented Marcus with a silver key encased in glass, a gift commemorating the day a single act of conscience had rewritten the rules. As the ceremony concluded, Marcus's father placed a hand on his son's shoulder. "You've given every veteran back their remembrance," he said, voice thick with pride. Children clustered at Marcus's feet, fishing autographs from his desk blotters, while white civic leaders offered heartfelt thanks. All day under the clear spring sky, the plaza remained open. Veterans gathered to share stories, mothers laid flowers at individual names, and school choirs sang hymns of freedom. Local cafes offered free coffee to anyone in uniform, and white volunteers handed out bottled water from the Veterans Alliance booth. Long after the final guest departed and the flags were furled, Marcus lingered by the reflecting pool, its surface still and undisturbed. He watched as his own reflection bowed beside the names etched in stone. In that silent solidarity of polished stone, waving banners, and interwoven lives, he felt the lasting change ripple through the city's heart. No longer barred by iron or by prejudice, every veteran would henceforth enter this sacred space freely. And in unlocking those gates, Marcus Reynolds had helped heal not just a monument, but an entire community's promise to remember and to welcome all who served.